This is the Moro Pigeon Show. I am your host, Moro. And the video I made today was very hard. It was very hard video. Emotional for me. See, about 2 weeks ago, I keep seeing on my phone, passenger pigeon. I never heard of that before. I never really opened the link or nothing, never. And last Saturday, I said, what is this passenger pigeon? And I opened the link. Man, I started reading. I'm going to tell you, I cried like a baby. Okay, that was very hard to read. And I couldn't stop reading the stories, everything, and I was so sad on that day. And I said, I have to make a video about this. So I made a video. It wasn't easy. I'm not a professional. I try to do my best with all the research that I gather. So, but I think people need to know about this. So here it goes.
On September 14, 1914, the last passenger pigeon died in a cage at the Cincinnati Zoo. It is one of the few species for which we know the exact date of extinction. When Europeans settled in North America in the late 1500s, the ectopist's migratorious population was as high as 6 billion in its forest habitat in eastern North America, up to 40% of the total bird population on the continent. Just a few decades of reckless overhunting and deforestation in the late 1800s brought the world's largest ever bird population to zero. Flocks of passenger pigeons in the 1800s were so dense that the birds could simply be batted out of the air with clubs as they flew over ridges. One shotgun blast could bring down as many as 50 birds. The naturalist John James Audubon observed one flock for 3 days and estimated the birds were flying past at a rate of 300 million per hour. Professional hunters tracked the nomadic flocks and met the demand for meat and feathers by suffocating birds nesting in trees with sulfurous fires, knocking nests and squabs, young pigeons, from trees, baiting and intoxicating them with alcohol-soaked grain to make them easier to catch, and by using live decoys with their eyes sewn shut. By 1880, overkill had made commercial hunting unprofitable. In April 1896, hunters found the last remnant flock of 250,000 and in one day killed all but 5,000 birds, with some accounts claiming all were killed. Despite commercial hunting, the passenger pigeon probably would not have survived the progressive loss of the vast expanses of eastern woodland habitat they needed to survive. Captive breeding efforts failed. Martha, the last passenger pigeon, is stored in the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian Institute, Washington, D.C. Pigeons are found all over the world. It would be hard to imagine a world without them. Yet these birds have had a major loss. Passenger pigeons used to number in the billion, blocking out the sun when they flew in huge flocks. Now, the only ones you see are on display through taxidermies. Jasmine, Jazz, Sohi, staff reporter March 17, 2025. Here is a drawing of passenger pigeons being shot out of the sky in Iowa by hunters. When they would fall out of the sky and onto the ground, hunters would use retriever dogs to bring the corpses over as they continued to shoot more and more pigeons. They would stop either when they ran out of bullets or the flock passed by. Photo credit, Frank Leslie's Illustrated News, Volume 25, Number 625, p. Public Domain, via Wikimedia Commons. What is the first thing that comes into your mind when you hear the word bird? Is it a fierce eagle soaring through the sky? Do you think of the sea where albatrosses and seagulls thrive? What about the birds that survive in the coldest and driest of conditions? Or does the mind immediately picture a common bird that we often see? Pigeons are in every major city, yet no one seems to particularly notice them. They are so common that various species and families of these birds that aren't closely related are still considered pigeons. Rock pigeons, carrier pigeons, passenger pigeons, and even doves are part of the Columbidae family. However, one of these pigeons doesn't exactly fit in with the rest. Which of these is the odd one out? The answer: passenger pigeons. Here is a taxidermy of a male passenger pigeon on display. Males had bright reddish chests and gray-blue feathers, while females had more dull-colored chest and tended to have more brown feathers. Passenger pigeons were also called the blue pigeons due to their blue coloring. How are passenger pigeons different? Well, when you look outside, you won't be able to find one. No matter how far or how carefully you search, you'll never find one because passenger pigeons are extinct. They have been gone for over a century, with the last dying on September 1, 1914, in the Cincinnati Zoo. How is it possible for a member of the Columbidae family to go extinct? Aren't these birds so common? Well, in fact, yes, they were. Passenger pigeons were once the most prominent birds found in North America, with an estimated population size of 3 to 5 billion. In comparison, one of the most common pigeons today, the rock pigeon, reaches an estimated 120 million birds worldwide. The passenger pigeon only inhabited North America. Today, the conservation status of rock pigeons is listed as least concerned, implying they won't be going anywhere anytime soon. However, considering that rock pigeons have a smaller population size, it is surprising that passenger pigeons, with a much larger population, were first to face extinction. To understand this discrepancy, it is important to set the context in which passenger pigeon populations started to decline. As the population of the United States continued to expand and traveled westward during the 1800s, many pioneers of the time followed migratory routes of the passenger pigeon. Passenger pigeons were reported to travel in huge numbers. Flocks ranged from a mile wide to 300 miles long, taking 14 hours to pass. The pigeons were abundant around the Great Lakes region in the summer and traveled south, around Georgia and Florida, in the winter. Pictured is a map of the range of the passenger pigeon in the past. The red area is the breeding zone of the passenger pigeon while the orange area is the normal zone. Image credit: Valerie Shansagod, CC by SA 1.0, via Wikimedia Commons. The travelers often related the huge flocks to thunder because the sounds of thousands of birds boomed in the sky. It was common for these early pioneers to see a storm of brown-spotted feathers, which darkened the sky. These flights often continued from morning until night and lasted for several days. As the pioneers continued to travel westward in search of land, many had to live off of natural resources as they traveled, like food. Food was vital to the survival of families as they traveled. The easiest game? The passenger pigeons. Pioneers could easily aim their guns at the huge flocks of pigeons as they traveled by, and shoot the birds with ease. Here is an illustration of men shooting down passenger pigeons with relative ease due to the sheer size of the flock. Dogs were used to retrieve the birds that were shot out of the sky. The dead pigeons would be used for consumption. Image credit: Smith Bennett, 1, public domain, via Wikimedia Commons. Not only did pioneers kill them for food as they traveled, but so did hunters. Hunters could profit largely from killing these birds as many people relied on them for food. Commercial hunting continued into the mid-1800s, causing one of the largest rapid decline of the birds between 1870 to 1890. Pigeons were commonly used as a part of meals as their meat was easy to harvest in the rugged terrains of the land. It was common to eat foods like pigeon pie. However, it didn't help that pigeon meat was commercialized as cheap meat. This caused the demand for pigeon meat to increase, as many could easily purchase pigeon meat for food. The vast population of pigeons meant that they were a stable source of food for many. Pigeons would be hunted and shipped to major cities to be sold for large profits. This posting in a newspaper was written as a warning of how pigeons were pests and it would be beneficial to kill them to make a pot pie. Image credit, Marshall County Republican, public domain, via Wikimedia Commons. Pioneers weren't the only ones who hunted these birds, farmers did too. Passenger pigeons, like many birds, had a diet made up of nuts, fruits, insects, seeds, and grains. As people continued to settle in the passenger pigeon's native habitat, a combination of mixed hardwood and eastern deciduous forest, farmers started to grow wheat, buckwheat, and maize. These farmers often killed off the pigeons who ate their crops. But it wasn't just one or two birds. It was hundreds. Passenger pigeons were never found alone. A massive flock of them could be found in one tree, looking more like leaves than birds, as there could be 100 nests in a single tree. The hundreds of squabs would quickly learn how to fly and leave the nest. Due to the mass amounts of pigeons, it wasn't uncommon to see many in fields pecking at the wheat the farmers were growing. Here is a taxidermy of an immature passenger pigeon, also known as a squab. They were similar in color to adult females, but lacked wing spotting. They were also darker on their heads, necks, and breasts. Squabs grew quickly and were able to fly and leave the nest after 14 days. Photo credit, CFAS, CC by SA 3.0, via Wikimedia Commons. The pigeons had to deal with the effects of pioneers, farmers, and hunters, with the most devastating blow being habitat loss. Trees were cut down to make room for towns, and passenger pigeons became the target of hunters. What was once the most common bird in North America, with a population in the billions, was then left to a few hundred. Efforts were made to try to conserve the population of the pigeon. In 1857, a bill was brought forth to the Ohio State Legislature seeking protection for the passenger pigeon. A select committee of the Senate filed a report stating, "The passenger pigeon needs no protection. Wonderfully prolific, having the vast forests of the north as its breeding grounds, traveling hundreds of miles in search of food, it is here today and elsewhere tomorrow, and no ordinary destruction can lessen them, or be missed from the myriads that are yearly produced." They could not be more wrong. Conservation efforts were largely ineffective, laws were either hardly enforced, or simply not passed. A bill was passed in the Michigan legislature making it illegal to net pigeons within 2 miles of a nesting area, but this law was weakly enforced. By the mid-1890s, the passenger pigeon had almost completely disappeared. In 1897, a bill was yet again introduced in the Michigan legislature, this time asking for a 10-year closed season on hunting passenger pigeons. Despite this bill passing, this attempt was also unsuccessful, as the measly number of birds that were still alive did not have the capacity to re-establish the population. Here is a passenger pigeon aviary containing 7 birds. These were some of the last few passenger pigeons. They were part of a group of pigeons that lived in captivity in the aviary of Professor C.O. Whitman, a professor of zoology at the University of Chicago. They were used in an attempt to restore the passenger pigeon population via breeding. Photo credit, Hubbard, J.G., public domain, via Wikimedia Commons. Passenger pigeons required large flocks for protection, as the massive amounts of birds greatly outnumbered their predators, foxes, wolves, hawks, and weasels, to the point where little damage could be done to the flock. The pigeons also required large flocks for breeding. They could not survive in small flocks, and their breeding habits required a large population to survive. The remaining passenger pigeons could not adapt fast enough to their changing world. Their homes were being destroyed. The trees that kept their nest safe were being toppled down to make way for fields of crops which they were killed for eating. The pigeons were shot out of the sky for food and cheap meat. Here is a drawing of a pigeon net used to capture passenger pigeons as they left or returned to their roosts. This was the most common technique used by hunters. Large amounts of pigeons would be caught from one net because of the sheer size of the flocks. By the 1900s, The passenger pigeons were facing the end of the line with only a few thousand remaining in the wild. The remaining few were sold to zoos and private collectors, displayed to the people that led to the downfall of their species. The last recorded passenger pigeon in the wild was shot in 1900. Here is a photo of a captive passenger pigeon. In captivity, passenger pigeons could live at least 15 years. On September 1, 1914, at around 1 p.m., Martha, the last remaining passenger pigeon, died in the Cincinnati Zoo at the age of 29. Her two male companions died in the same zoo in 1910, leaving her as the last of her kind until that fateful day, when the passenger pigeon went extinct. Here is a taxidermy of Martha, the last passenger pigeon. Her remains were sent to Washington, D.C. for preservation at the Smithsonian Institute for Natural History. Martha has been on public display in the Smithsonian's Objects of Wonder exhibit alongside a mountain gorilla skull since March 10, 2017. It's been 111 years since Martha's death, and the passenger pigeon has never been spotted since.